grandfather just passed away in June at 91. So, pretty good. And he was actually raised by his grandparents.
Wow,
so he was raised by Austin John and his wife. So Austin John was a very big presence in kind of the family lore because he had raised my grandfather. And in the Second World War, he was an RSM and went over to England to train initially. He didn't see action, but so I remember there were always pictures of him at my grandparents' farm with his decorations and all of that. And I had remember hearing that his brother had died in the war, but I didn't really know too much more than that. I think other people in my family did. I think one of my uncles knew that he had died at Passchendaele.
Gotcha.
But that was kind of the extent.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, it's one of those amazing stories, especially what I did. I prepared a presentation, but I'm sure there's a couple things you might have seen or kind of overlooked. But it kind of gives you a bit more of their stories, and just from what I understand, I imagine they were quite close as brothers.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you been able to access? There's something called the service files, which you can find online. Have you seen them? Their whole dossier.
So their records.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so I did find it for both of them, which was mind blowing. I didn't know that those were probably available. What's phenomenal.
What's quite cool about them too is you can see when they first filled in all their information just how much overlap there was. And the other neat thing I noticed with them is when you went to go sign up in the First World War, you were assigned a number. That's your service number. And the way it went was the first guy in line is going to get one number, the second guy is going to get the second number, so on and so forth. And the two brothers have something called sequential service numbers, which means they sign up at the same time. And then when you look at kind of the information they're giving, one of the questions they get asked is, do you have any previous military experience? And they're both listing from the same regiment, the 27th Regiment, from the militia. So all that to be said, these, I'm sure they were very close-knit. And then later on, and I found one of the challenging things with those service files is actually interpreting it and understanding what all the abbreviations mean and all that. But they get over to England, and they're not actually in France, but they're seen as top soldiers, so they keep getting promoted and promoted up. And what they both do is say, screw the high rank. I think they were both sergeants by that point, and then went down to lowest rank to private to actually get to France, and that's when they end up with the Edmonton Regiment. And so, but it's one of those amazing things. So what I prepared for you, Kate, and I only got the free version of this Google Meet, so it only lasts an hour. So that's why I try and do the high pace. I just did a little presentation kind of deciphering that service file in a way that, kind of forgetting about the training and that sort of thing. You can go watch a documentary and learn about it, and they'll probably do a better job at explaining than I could. But really what we're going to be looking at is the experiences of both of them when they were actually in France on the front line on the Western Front. Maybe to an extent that we'll actually know today better where they were than if they would have known. Because, when you sign on, you're a part of a unit, you're just a small, what do they call it? A small keg in a big machine, basically. And so, what's amazing is now through the records, we can actually decipher and find out where your relative was wounded or even killed and that sort of thing, right? So I hope you find it interesting. And then I guess it also kind of ties in. I know initially you'd reached out regarding that battlefield tour. And so this is exactly the sort of stuff like we do out in France where, actually bringing you to the places that your relatives were and bring it all to life, right? Which is quite cool. It's something special. If you have any questions at any moment, don't hesitate to ask. I can have the tendency to talk a bit quick. It's all good, right? But so if audio cuts out for whatever reason, let me know and we can deal with that. The other thing I'm doing too is, hopefully if it's working, I'm recording this conversation so then I can send it to you, and then you can share it with whoever in your family might be interested, and so you have that record, and then you can also get a copy of the presentation so you can share it. But similar to the service file, the presentation might not be deciphered as well as it could have. So, but then with the video, I'm sure it'll be better. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually grew up in the military.
Oh, so
really? I'm used to all of the terminology.
Perfect.
So,
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. And have you ever been out to France or no? Like, have you been out to the Western Front?
Yeah, I went to Vimy.
Okay.
I did go to Vimy in, 2007.
Oh, for the big, that would have been cool.
I didn't know that Austin John had fought near there.
Yeah.
at the time. So I went to Vimy and Arras on my own.
Oh, wow.
But I haven't gone to any of the other locations.
Were you there for the ceremony on April 9th when they rededicated, or no?
Okay. No, I was there in May of that year.
So just after. But the same, but like, it's quite amazing. Actually, I'll just jump right into the presentation here, because it was in May that they both came to the Western Front. Let me see if I go present. Can you see that properly, or is that all good?
Yeah, that's great.
I'm curious to, like, this is a photo I'd found on the Canadian Virtual War Memorial. This was for George. Yeah. Is this really George, do you know, or is it perhaps Austin? I know they were both married.
No, so that's Vic. So his name was George Victor.
Okay,
but everyone referred to him as Vic.
Gotcha. So that actually is Vic. Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's his wife, Florence, sitting next to him. So my mother remembered her. She lived until the mid-'80s.
Wow.
And so she was known as Auntie Flo. And I did think she did remarry at some point, but they didn't have any children. But yeah, I have the full picture of that.
Oh, do you? Well. Do you have other stuff as well? I'm just curious, like any other photos or of perhaps Austin as well?
I do have one of Austin John and the family.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've come across it, but it's him and his wife and their 2 daughters. That one's fairly easy to find because it was on the cover of the Globe and Mail a few years ago.
Oh, was it? No way.
Yeah, because this is Chris's family, right? Chris Hadfield.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, he's my uncle.
No way,
so
really?
They were, yeah. So that's the association there. Because I forget why they were on the cover of the Globe, but they were on there. So I have the photo of all of them as well. But when my grandfather passed away in June, my mother, who's at the farm dealing with all of the things, she said that there is a trunk in one of the rooms that was Austin John's trunk. And she hasn't opened it yet, but there may be a treasure trove.
It makes you wonder what's in there, right? You know, because literally talking about a farm find, right? So, but do let me know if there's anything, First World War related or something like that, from anything from identification to whatever it might be. Because what's so amazing with artifacts is they often give you clues. Like, for instance, this photo, we know for sure this wasn't. This is an early war shot just based off of not only the rank and that, but also his uniform, right? And you can see the cross rifle showing that he's a shooting instructor, and yeah, but so you never know. I might just have another look. This might not be the best example, but I'm just super curious though. So that's awesome. What we'll do once again, I'm skipping through all the stuff. Like, once again, you have all their service files so you can see when they signed up and their general movements and that sort of thing. But once again, if you look at the service number here, and I'm just trying to find the other, but there's Vic is 402108, whereas Austin is 402109. And so once again, the main thing, they signed up together. They're going to be through and through together. They sail overseas together. And then they both make the decision together to go down in rank, to go on a draft with the 49th Battalion, which is quite interesting because it's, obviously the Edmonton Regiment, most of the guys who are in there by that point are from Saskatchewan or from Alberta, so it really is a prairie unit. And so instead of kind of going over with an Ontario fighting battalion, they just want to get to the front. So I wonder, and I guess we don't really know what led to that decision. But certainly something did.
When Austin John came over from England with Nana, with his wife, they originally went to Saskatchewan.
Ah, really?
And they originally went to Saskatchewan in Moose Jaw.
Yeah.
And they had their little boy with them who was a baby.
Yeah.
Whose name was Austin. And he died when he was about a year old.
Oh, really?
And he's buried in Moose Jaw. I've been to the gravesite there.
Yeah.
And then they had Joan. Yeah, they had their daughter Joan, and they had Austin.
Yeah.
And then my great grandmother was a baby, I think, at that point, and she was ill, and so they decided to go back to Ontario. And so they buried him there, and then went back east. Yeah. So I don't know if that had contributed to the appeal maybe of the 49th, but I can remember my grandfather speaking about how Austin John had a big, I think he was, influenced by the time of going west, to the prairies and kind of making his own destiny. I think that really spoke to him in some way. So maybe there was a connection there as well.
Makes you wonder, right? Yeah. Such a fascinating time period for that, right? Where it's just really the frontier and there's nothing really there. And yeah, no central heating either, right? So when the winter comes, it really comes.
No, they were intense. Like they were all
Yeah,
intense in the
unreal,
Saskatchewan
right?
winter, which is
It's crazy to think,
horrifying.
right?
So
So, but
yeah.
anyway, so when they what happens is once they leave the kind of base camp in England, they take a ferry over to get to France. They're going to spend about a week at the base camp there. They call it the bull pit or the bull ring rather. And basically, it's these combat veterans who are saying, you know, this is real war now, and they're basically getting bullied into being tougher soldiers. And then that's when they get sent out to go join the 49th Battalion at the start of kind of end of April, early May of 1917. They're making the trip. So just for context here, when they get to a place called Villers-aux-Bois, it's at the Vimy Ridge sector, and that's quite significant because, well, especially as Canadians, so often when we think about the First World War, we think about Vimy Ridge and all that. Well, the Battle of Vimy Ridge took place in early April of 1917. And it was the bloodiest day in Canadian military history when they first went over the top, and the battle continued for several days. And so, all that to be said, by the end of April 1917, they're starving for reinforcements. And so, I'll just call him your grandfather for simplicity, and great uncle, right? But when they joined the unit, they were not alone. There were tons and tons of reinforcement drafts coming in at that time, and so a lot of the soldiers were brand new to the front. But you know, when they're coming there, and you can actually still see Villers-Bois, like this is an original wall right over here, and you can see some etches. It's all chalk because
You stopped the screen sharing at this
oh,
point.
does
So
it
I'm
not show up anymore?
No, it's just your
Okay.
view right now.
If that happens again, let me know.
Sure.
Because it's happened in the past. It's super frustrating. Okay, here we go.
There we go. Yeah.
We got it there. Anyway, but with in Villers-aux-Bois, it's quite neat because you can actually still see all the shrapnel damage up here. And so if we went back to 1917, your grandpa and his brother would have been here, and they would have been looking at the same wall. So what you're laying your eyes on is actually something they saw right when they were coming to the Western Front. And this is their first impression of kind of real war. You know, sure, they'd been in the militia before, but now they're actually seeing shrapnel strikes. And all that to be said, if you might have been in that window when that shell burst, you could have been killed. The town was filled with Canadians. It was one of the most Canadian towns in France. There was hardly any French people there, and it was a rest village. And so when you were fighting in the First World War, and I'll get into it a bit later, you spent some of your time in the trenches, but also some of your time out at rest. And so this is when the battalion had just left the trenches. They were coming in for rest, and that's when the reinforcement draft, including your relatives, reached them. And so once again, this is late April, early 1917. If we look over here, you got Villers-aux-Bois up here. There's a city. You can see all the roads converging down here. That's Ypres, where you were, I guess, what would that be? Nearly 20 years ago now.
Almost 20 years ago.
I know, it's crazy. Time flies, hey? So, the significant thing, though, if we look, it's what you got right over here. So this is Vimy Ridge, right? You can actually still see with the little white thing around there. That's the Vimy Ridge Memorial. And you can see this more or less the front lines before the battle. And then what happens on the 9th of April 1917, the Canadians launch a big attack. And they push right through, and then they break the German line here. So the Germans have to fall back to this new line of trenches over here, more or less. And this is kind of the line of trenches that your relatives are going to go up and face, if you will. You know, in the First World War, you're not always attacking. A lot of the time, they're just sitting around. But, you know, when you're sitting in a trench, you can imagine it's not the safest place to be. If we get an idea now, and this kind of goes back, like if you were to come to the battlefield today, and when you went to France, you wouldn't have actually seen much of the destruction or anything like that. The reason for it, they wanted it to go back to the way it was. But what's amazing now with aerial imagery and photography from back in the day, you can actually see what it looked like at the time, which is quite neat. And when we use kind of the battalion records, and we can actually figure out what trenches that your relatives went in for the first time. And so when we look at this trench sector here, you know, it sure looks like all jagged lines, but you can actually quite clearly see no man's land right here. So you have the German trench sector, the British trench sector, and no trenches here, because that's no man's land, right? So this is approximately where it was. Right back here, if you can see in the bottom left of your screen, this is called the reserve trenches, and it was right here that both of your relatives first went into the trenches. So you're going to spend, I think, about 48 to 72 hours right here. They're deepening the trench. they're dealing with it was a lot of snowfall recently, and it just melted, so a lot of it is just maintaining that trench. And so this is where they actually first come under fire. There's some shells that come in, nothing too devastating or anything, but this is literally where they get their first experience of the trenches, right there at Vimy Ridge, or just past Vimy Ridge. But the town of Vimy itself is only about 400 meters away. So quite frankly, it was at Vimy, if you know what I mean. You know, and if we were looking at kind of what a trench looks like, this is a photo taken about a year before the time period we're talking about. But you know, whether you're looking at 1914 or 1918, a trench doesn't change that much. You can see the main things about a trench. I mean, I'm sure you know this already, but it's below ground. Problems with that is water, because water always goes to the lowest place. But the reason you want to get below ground is because not so much, sure, machine gun fire is deadly and all that, but also artillery fire. That's a big killer of the First World War. And so if you can get to a lower place, you can get away from not only the shell burst, but the shrapnel that starts flying around. Even better if you could get lower than a trench, and you can get into something called the dugout, and these are going to come in a bit later on. And you can see they dig them quite a few feet below ground, and that's just where you can get some shelter and protection, right? So you can see telephone cables as well coming through. There's a lot of work you need to do to keep maintaining it, right? And that's why they have all the guys there. So but that would have been the day-to-day life. So, you know, you'd wake up, usually you'd be up all night, you know, on sentry duty, or that's when all the activity happened. Maybe you had to go in no man's land, put up some barbed wire, and then there'd be stand 2 in the morning, so everyone gets up on the firing step, making sure no Germans are coming over, and then eventually stand down, and then you have breakfast, and then you can sleep during the day. Most guys did. And then eventually it's stand 2 again at dawn, dusk, sorry. And then once again, it just rotates and rotates. So you're back at nighttime then, where it comes alive. For the soldiers, they're going to spend generally about 1 week in the front line trenches. You're going to do 1 week in reserve. And then finally 1 week at rest, which would be, for instance, Villers-aux-Bois, about 10 kilometers behind. So you're kind of out of the way from artillery, but not totally. So it's quite straining, you could imagine, especially if they were there in the winter time. The fortunate thing is your relatives missed out the coldest winter on record in the trenches, where the winter before the Battle of Vimy Ridge went down to minus 25. If you could imagine that, spending a week outside in a ditch. You know, it's just, and especially you had Aussies not too far away, and you can imagine what was going on for them, right? So anyway. But but this is just kind of the routine that we're going to see on a day-to-day basis, more or less. And this is what they're first coming into. Later on, after about 3 days, when they're down here, they're going to move further up north. You can see this kind of railway line that runs through. And what they had done is they had built dugouts, so these same things, all inside of the railway line right here. And this is where a company was going to be. Now, a company, and I'm sure you're familiar with companies and that sort of thing, right? Like within battalion. So traditionally, the First World War, they're about 120. Because they've had so many reinforcements, it's actually oversized right now. It's about 170 guys, including your 2 relatives. And they're now living in these dugouts just around here. Now, it's right here that Austin's actually going to get wounded. And you can see, here's the town of Vimy. Here's it overlaid, and you get the dugouts right there. And what happens, and we can get on the 18th, it actually mentions intermittent shelling on enemy front line during the whole day, enemy artillery active.
I found that entry as well.
You found that there? So. Did you find the actual location here, or?
No, I couldn't pinpoint it that
gotcha.
That's amazing, but I was able to pinpoint the day.
Perfect. Yeah, and so what's amazing is this is literally where he was, and so you can see Vimy not too far away. And it's funny too, because I'm sure you would have done the math. You know, they weren't actually on the front line for too long at all. At least Austin wasn't.
Yeah, he was barely there.
Yeah, and it's one of those classic things that there's such a big learning curve in the trenches that, you know, sometimes it's carelessness, but really when it's artillery fire, it's somewhere like this where he's at a reserve position. It's just wrong place, wrong time, and you could be killed. There's stories of guys who literally just show up in the trench and then a shell comes in, they're gone, right? So, but I mean, that's just a reality on the Western Front, right? But yeah, all that to be said, you know, he wasn't on Vimy Ridge, but it was just north of it, and this was a quiet period. But there's always, they call it trench wastage, where just day by day, guys are naturally going to get hit. But luckily, because he was already in the rear areas, it was quick to evacuate him. He wasn't going over the top at Passchendaele, for instance, where, if you had a wound of any case, odds are it's going to get septic because all the mud and everything like that. But then that's basically his war over, right? So and then after that, it's really just Vic who's left with the 49th Battalion in the front line. He's going to go on
so
to...
I have a question about Austin's injury.
Yeah.
Right. So it said GSW to the foot. Now, is that interpreted as a general shell wound?
Yeah.
The
official one is it's so you have the two wound types. It would be SW or GSW. GSW officially means gunshot wound, but it's almost always interchangeable for a shrapnel wound. So it's basically if some shrapnel gets in, for instance, it was his foot which got hit. And, from there, it's not going to be a machine gun or something like that doing it. So, yeah, but it seems, I would say with 90% confidence, it was from the artillery fire, and it was specifically shrapnel, which would have got him right there. So, but once again, by 1917, it's not a life-threatening condition too bad. But I think within a day, he's at somewhere called the Casualty Clearance Station. So you'll see it marked as a CCS on the service file. And the what do you call it? The medicine had gone so good by that time in the war that once you get there, you have a 98% chance of survival. And so, which is shocking, right? But it's because the front lines didn't really fluctuate too much. And so the medical system could get really efficient. So if you got wounded at Vimy Ridge or whatever, the most deadly stage was trying to get off the battlefield. But because he was hardly on the battlefield, if you will, he had a good chance, right? But then once again, if that shrapnel had hit him a foot higher or something, it might have hit him right through the heart. So, even though it's a cushy wound, and luckily that was his war done because, if he didn't get wounded there, then he would have kept serving, and then odds are it would have been, he would have been at Passchendaele too, where the unit just gets wiped out. It's the darkest hour, right? So, anyway, but that's more or less his war done. You might have seen that, actually, before I kind of go too far in, you might have seen that, George actually got wounded as well on the service file.
Yeah.
And I'll just...
he got like a wrist injury or something?
Yeah, it wasn't anything big. I'll just show you. I didn't mark down the location, but if we just kind of go down here, I'll show you exactly where that was. I'm just seeing, so that's Amiens. Okay. And so this is Vimy Ridge once here. So the front line is more or less over here. And then they're still using Vimy Ridge. All the supplies has to go over here and that sort of thing. And so in July of 1917, they're spending a lot of their time at a place called Zouave Valley, which is the valley just down here. And you can't really see the topography, but it more or less dips down pretty sharp. And so it's while they're down here somewhere, once again, it's more or less approximate, that the Germans sent in some, they would sometimes shell, but actually, no, it was just an injury, I think a sprain he had, if I remember right. And, but anyway, that happened somewhere here. It's an ironic thing because, literally he was wounded at Vimy Ridge. It's very much part of the Vimy Ridge battlefield. But it wasn't exactly from enemy fire. But he was only out of line, I think, for a couple days, and you would have seen that as well in the report, and then he was quick to come back. What happens after that period in late August, early September, they move up here to a place called Lens. Just a couple weeks before, there was a huge battle raging with the Canadians where when about 10,000 guys are killed, wounded, or missing trying to take this the city. Which is phenomenal numbers. It's almost as high as Vimy Ridge, but often Hill 70 is never really spoken about. For the 49th Battalion, they're kind of reserve. They're part of the reserve brigade of the reserve division. So all that to be said, they don't have an active role until they come up to a place called Hill 70, which is right here, and they launch a trench raid and that sort of thing. But it doesn't concern the same company as your grandpa, so it's pretty cushy for him. He's mainly back here, whereas the front lines are up here. It's still under shell fire. It's really hot and dry in that sector, but it's all good. It could be much worse, and eventually it does get much worse when the whole reason for this battle and some of the other fighting that's happening here is trying to divert the Germans' attention from what's actually happening up towards Passchendaele, because since July, since he was at that valley and he sprained his He sprained his arm, I think it was. The Germans were the British were launching this big offensive to try and get to the Belgian port up near Ypres, which is all the way about 60 kilometers further north. So you have Ypres here, and they wanted to try and push all the way to Bruges, and that's a heck of a long way to go. And the reason for it was all the German U-boats were coming out and sinking British shipping, right? And so they said, okay, the objective is to get all the way to Bruges over here. But if we can't get that far, then the subsidiary objective is going to be Passchendaele, which is that village there. And now it takes them about 3 months to get there, and it was meant to be taken within more or less the first week. And it was the wettest winter on record and that sort of thing. And so initially it was just the British and the Irish attacking. Then they called in the South Africans. They started attacking. Once again, they're all getting shot up and mangled, and they're not being able to capture objective. They call in the Kiwis and the Australians, and they're lynching forward. But still, the village of Passchendaele remains firmly in German hands. And so the final corps, the final formation that's not used up, is the Canadian Corps, who's still down near Lens, Hill 70, and Vimy. And so in October of 1917, they get the call to come forward. And for the guys who had been in the Ypres salient the year before, the Canadians who had served there in the summer of 1916, they said it was, you couldn't even recognize the main features. It had just been so torn up by shelling, and then also just the mud, because, if you think about the amount of guys that would have been partaking in this battle passion, it's hundreds of thousands of guys in a small area. And so all the guys trampling and moving, it's bound to become just an absolute quagmire. And all the shelling, it's destroying the drainage ditches. And so it's a real nightmare when they show up. When they come in, when Vic comes in, they come up to Ypres, they march in, and then eventually they're going to come up this road. So they leave out the Menin Gate, and then they come up here, and they march all the way to, I just want to make sure it's all changed now, but yeah, up to a place called Vilja. And they're billeted on in kind of the 24th October, a week before they're going to go into the attack, and Victor gets killed. They're billeted just in the field over here. And there's something, I don't know if you're familiar. Have you ever heard of German Gotha bombers? They're basically, imagine a World War I bomber plane.
Yeah.
And so they're all bivouacking here. So once again, there's no billets or anything. Basically the same field, just imagine muddy. And they said, make do with what you can. And importantly, there's a big ammunition dump nearby. And so on the 24th of October, the Germans send in their planes, and if they drop the bombs anywhere, they're going to hit guys. But they were targeting that ammunition dump. And it was right at the time they were out. I can't remember if it was for some sort of meal. And so all the 49ers, and especially C Company, which once again, not your great uncle's company, which is great, but they were out getting food, and so simply there were 20 guys just killed or wounded just in the span of a couple seconds by that, and they weren't even on the front line at Passchendaele yet. So all that to be said, just here, the Loyal Edmonton Regiment lost more guys than they did in Afghanistan over several years. Just it's just mind-boggling if you think about it. But later on, what takes place is there's a big attack that happens 2 days later with the Canadians, and they're able to push further up at Passchendaele, and then they're going to do another push 4 days later on the 30th October, and that's when it includes Vic as part of the 49th Battalion and everyone else. I'm just going to find it here. So I just want to show you kind of the conditions of the ground. This is an intelligence photo that was actually issued to the 49th Battalion intelligence officer, and it shows the battlefield they're going to fight over in September of 1917.
We just lost the menu.
Oh, can you not see? Yeah. Let me get it again. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I think we're back.
Nope. It almost went,
and
then it didn't.
Odd. Okay, we'll give it another go. Are we good? I think so.
Looks good. Looks good so far.
Perfect. Okay. But I just want to show you, so September was a dry month. If they had attacked in September, it would have been much easier. You can almost see it looks almost dusty, right? Where, the shell holes are well defined, that sort of thing. But then fast forward, this is February of 18, but this is what it looked like when Vic showed up there. You can still see, if you see this, it's a very iconic little strip of road right here. And if you look at this other image, you can still see that same You can go to the future. You also see over here, can you see that square? So that's a big German pillbox called First Farm, and that's going to be quite significant with A Company when they go into the attack. Once again, the conditions of the ground, this is them more or less, this place called Chateau Wood, this is when they're marching up, this is what it's looking like. But once you get to the actual battlefield, it's even worse. And so there are stories from the 49th, and kind of same with any Canadian at Passchendaele, but guys drowning in the mud with the equipment. It's so slippery. And in that life and death struggle, there was no trenches, and you just basically connected shell holes, and that became your front line. And it was more or less every man for himself. What happens that day when they eventually do the attack? You'll notice that these are the different companies, right? So you have 4 companies in a battalion. A company to which Vic belongs, and same with Austin, but Austin's been out for quite a few months now. They're going to be part of the reserve wave, and the expectation is more or less C and B company are going to go over as cannon fodder, and by the time and A and D company might get through. And so, but what actually happens is the Germans know they're coming, and so as soon as the attack starts at 5:50 in the morning, the German guns they see the flares and they start sending in the artillery within 2 minutes. And so by the time Vic and most of the guys from A company and same with D company are crossing this road to get forward, once again, a lot of them were shot down by machine gun fire and what have you. They come under horrendous shell fire. And so most of the guys are killed or wounded just within about this road. Because as you can read from this first-hand account by a guy named Raleigh Knight from Calgary, who was a platoon commander from A Company at the time, he said, directly we kicked off, our casualties were heavy. We immediately came under terrific fire, both from machine guns and artillery. And in crossing the road, to which I've referred, which is this one right here, we were stopped principally by machine gun fire from First Farm, which is right up there. That's that pillbox. I forget how many men I had left, but we managed to gather a few together and occupied shell holes and hung on. We were bombarded all day. And all that to be said, most of the guys, and it's likely that Vic was killed just in the kind of opening moments of the attack. The survivors, as kind of Raleigh Knight refers to, it becomes individual efforts of basically bravery, where guys are fighting shell hole to move forward. To give you an idea too, at some of the losses, one of the projects I did a couple of years ago was marking out the locations that either bodies were reportedly buried or they were found after the war, including, if you see the grave references, those are unidentified soldiers. And what's amazing is after the battle, they said that the front line, if you kind of follow my cursor, front line ended up to be about like that. So they didn't get far forward ahead at all. But in fact, you see there's a huge amount of guys that were killed up here. And so for those guys who unfortunately died up there, odds are they had been able to push up individually or in a small group, and they just simply got wiped out by German counterattacks. So all that to be said, in that battlefield, there was so much confusion about where guys actually were, and where the objective was, and so a lot of the guys just maybe fell in the mud and then were never found. And so for Passchendaele especially, you get a huge proportion of guys who, much like Vic, just got swallowed up in the mud and were never found, or if they were found after the war, they were never identified. And this is, and once again, the battlefield hasn't changed much, right? You can still think Vic spent his kind of last moments on this planet right over here. That's where A Company jumped off, and there's First Farm, and that's where all the machine gun fire was coming from. And it's right on this road that the German artillery sighted. So as soon as they had to inevitably cross that road, it was like a hurricane of fire that you had to get through. And only about 10% of guys got through that gauntlet. And then if they did, they had to keep fighting for another day and a half, which is just unreal to think. What I wanted to do, though, instead of just me kind of going on and trying to explain what it was like, I wasn't there. Last year, I went to Ottawa and I recorded a couple interviews, which were done back in the 1960s, actually, of veterans, including one guy who ends up as a double amputee from Passchendaele. And it's a brilliant interview. And one thing he talks about is all kind of the near-death experiences he had. And he was about, I don't know, no more than 200 meters or within 200 meters of Vic and Vic's eventual corpse once he fell. And I think it gives you a good impression of kind of what it was actually like to be up there. So I'll just play that for you right now.
Sure. It just went back to just the U.
Oh,
again.
did it? Okay, no
Yeah.
problem. I'll just put this here so you can kind of see what it looks like.
Sure.
I just got it on
There we go.
iMovie.
Oh, yeah.
Let me know if it.
Now
if you
that's as
can
far
hear.
as I can tell you. Outside of another little incident when we took over from the 116th Battalion at night, and we made a front line out of connecting the shell hole. I too had two Indian boys that I was sent out on a covering party. One had the right side of his face blown off, and the other had the left side of his face blown off, and me in the middle didn't get a thing. But it was something I couldn't understand. And another little incident that comes to my mind now, and it makes you wonder. One boy coming down, he got a nice cushy one in the arm. He says, "Blighty for me, I got a cushy one." Whiz bang, and he was no more.
It's a shell and whiz bang.
And he wasn't from here to the wall away. Just after he jumped up. When we got up, got into the shell hole, there was a boy come up. He crawled on my left. And when I came to, I felt something cold on my face. The left side of my face, and I wiped it. I had his brain, and I got in the feet. Why? Now, if that boy hadn't come up, he'd hung back a little. Nervous. I don't hold it against the boy. But I bless him. Because if he hadn't have been there, that would have been me. Now, I wonder why. I often say to my wife, you'll get it when it's coming. Well, that number comes up, and when the good man above says, "Come on, you want it up here or down below, wherever which way I go," that's when my time will be. But I hope he gives me job polishing stars. Well, that's a very good story.
You had a good sense of humor, I would say, but it's quite remarkable that when you hear about that young little boy and to think, it's possible. It's perhaps unlikely, but it is possible. It was actually Vic, that died, and
Possible.
who knows, right? There was about just under 700 guys who went forward that day, and just about actually, it was, I forget the actual number now, but all that to be said, there was only about 100 guys that actually came out of the action. And so nearly 80% of the guys who went forward were either killed, wounded, or in the vast majority case, missing. I have found, and you might have found the same references, your relative, Vic, was actually buried by a comrade on the battlefield, or was reportedly buried on the ridgeline, instead of just being missing.
I hadn't come across that.
And but unfortunately his body was never recovered or any close coordinates given. So it's similar, like with some of these guys that you find the names right here. I'm just trying to think of an example. Like Sidney Reigate here, he's actually missing. He, much like your relative, he's commemorated on something called the Menin Gate, which it's right up here, right? So you could actually, if we went to the appropriate panel, you can see the name of the guy, and
there's Vic's name.
Yeah, Vic's right there, right?
Yeah, right there. Yeah.
And then, but these are all missing. But sometimes they were actually buried by their guys, and then just their body couldn't be found. You could imagine too, it's still a battlefield. So even if they were killed on a day, and if they couldn't bring the body out, and you could imagine that sort of mud. If another artillery shell comes in, now you can't even identify them. So in many cases, these corpses are just simply vaporized, and there's not a chance, right? But the idea was, at least behind memorials like these, is give some sort of closure to the family, that at least somewhere near here. And the symbolic nature, and what's quite amazing about this memorial to the missing here, is back in October of 1917 when they had come back to Ypres, the unit, and then when they marched out to Passchendaele, there was really two ways to get out of the city. The one way that 80% of the soldiers went out was through the Little Gate, through the south. But for the 49th Battalion that time, they actually came through the Menin Gate. So this photo was taken in... oh, hang on, I think it's shut off now.
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
Yeah, let me get it. But what's amazing to imagine here, right? This photo was taken in 1927. If we were 10 years before in October, you would actually seen Vic marching out this gate, and he never returned. And so same with so many of these guys. And so now their name is etched into this gate. So it's quite a symbolic place to actually visit. And you might have, and I imagine you're probably familiar, or you might have heard about this memorial before. They every night at 8 p.m. they actually do the last post. It's the Belgians who do it, which is a fabulous tribute, right? But in reality, he's not there. He's missing on the battlefield, or perhaps in one of the cemeteries to the missing, right? Like you can see this whole row at just about a kilometer away from where the battle took place, and Soldier of the Great War, 49th, 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 49th. So it's one of those amazing things, right? But tragic too, because so many of those guys, some were only 18, literally, who went over the top that day, and just cut down, right? So, yeah. But anyway, that's just a little short presentation for you about the I guess their story, and really, you're quite well versed, and when I say this, I'm only scratching the surface here. There's so much more. But I hope at least you took away something new, or there's a bit like that you haven't heard of before, or something like